Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope everyone enjoyed snack time. We're getting more plates, and the food will still be up there, so if you're still peckish, feel free to go and get your stuff. You won't get yelled at. Please join me in welcoming Janet McGowan, Jonathan Field, and Andrew Isherwood from PTFS Europe to talk about ILLs going viral.
It's a pleasure to be here. I've come all this way to Fieldand from London. Andrew's come in further, he's come from Wales, so it's a good effort. So I'm Jonathan Field, I'm the Managing Director of PTFS Europe. I'd like to introduce Janet McGowan, who's our Director of Operations, and Andrew Isherwood, a Senior Developer who works with us. We didn't quite bring everyone with us today, but got some of us here. So PTFS Europe have been around for 11 years this autumn, or this fall. And we've sort of grown from having about 3 co-libraries, I think, back when we started, very small co-libraries in the UK. And we work with over 130 different libraries in the UK now, all sorts of shapes and sizes. And one of the projects we've been working on the last couple of years is interlibrary loans module, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background to where we sort of came from and started with interlibrary loans, and then I'm going to hand over to Janet, who's actually going to show you the software itself, hopefully, and we'll let you have a quick look at it. So I guess most of you probably understand what interlibrary loans is, but really it's the ability to allow libraries to have relationships with each other and borrow and potentially lend between libraries. So that's really what we're talking about. Of course, a lot of that these days, particularly in the UK, we see it more and more. Interlibrary loans is not so much physical borrowing and lending books, it's actually electronic. So it's document delivery, it's article requests, it's documents straight to the end user. So fulfillment of interlibrary loans can take many sort of shapes and forms. I guess also you're probably familiar with a lot of these resource sharing networks. So you have people like OCLC, ILL. In the UK, we have people like Unity UK. There's often national agreements. There's people like Dan in Denmark. We obviously have the British Library in London who do a huge amount of interlibrary loans. So there's a lot of different people to work with interlibrary loans. And one of the big problems that has been there for many, many years is that there aren't really any standards to work towards with interlibrary loans. That's probably one of the biggest challenges. When I first came into library automation, which was about in the early 1990s, it was around about the time that the standard was appearing, so the 10160 and 10161 standards. And really, in all the time that I've been in library automation, nobody is really using it in any constructive way. It was designed as a very complicated standard. It's hard to implement, hard to use. So even with an ISO standard in place, interlibrary loans hasn't really got anything useful. The UK is, I guess, quite unique in that, particularly with academic libraries, the vast majority of interlibrary loans do go through the British Library. And some of that is still print, but the vast majority of that is now electronic as well. And the British Library have a system called iLL, which I think stood for Automated Request Transmission in Telex, which gives you an indication. It's probably somebody in the room don't know what Telex is, but originally, in the 1970s, it was a telex system, basically the system of sending telexes backwards and forwards to request material. That was replaced at some point in the 80s and 90s by email, which in effect was just sending these telex transmissions over email rather than by telex. A few years ago, it transferred into a web services API, and that's really when we started work on the co-interlibrary loans module. Now, That's all very, very well and good for us in the UK. I know that for anybody outside of the UK, integrating with the British Library is very expensive. The cost of doing it is very expensive. So you'll see in a moment the way we've developed interlibrary loans is to allow you to hook into potentially other services as well. In the public library sector in the UK, we have something which is called Unity UK, which is really a consortial arrangement between public libraries, where you can pretty much lend and borrow from any other public library in the UK. That's a system that was originally developed by Fretwell Downing, and it's very, very old, and there's no way to integrate with it whatsoever. There's no API you can get to. So again, that causes a lot of problems in terms of trying to develop an integrated interlibrary loan service. The other thing that we see in the United Kingdom, which you may or may not see, is that pretty much every tender that we have to respond to has some sort of requirement for interlibrary loans, and very often we see that as a mandatory requirement as well. Therefore, it's essential for us as a company, but it's obviously essential for libraries in the UK as well, that COA does have an interlibrary loans module. And we started working on this around about the time that the British Library launched their API service. COA, or the integration we did with COA, was one of the first integrations with that British Library service back in 2016, I think it was. We also at the same time provided another sort of generic email interlibrary loans service, and that was really so that you could send an interlibrary loan request to pretty much any other library in the form of a shape or form of an email, which means that you can integrate with people who haven't got any sort of structured service to talk to. And we've had about 10 libraries using this COA interlibrary loan module over the past 3 years or so. But the way we originally developed it, it was very UK-centric. It was specifically designed to work with the British Library. And we got to a point where there was interest from other parts of the world in the interlibrary loans module. So we took the opportunity to sort of split it up a bit, to make it available to everybody in the community so that they can integrate it with their own local services. So we have this concept of a front-end and back-end interlibrary loan service. And in version 17.11 was the first iteration of the interlibrary loans work we developed. And we call that Community iLL because it was our sort of community version as opposed to the version we were previously running. And on top of that version of interlibrary loans, which is delivered with the standard COA package, you can add your own backends. And to date, we've produced 3 backends. And I'm just going to ask Andrew to talk a little bit about how the backends and the front ends work to bring the whole interlibrary loans model together. Just hand over to Andrew.
So yeah, the key requirement when we looked at making interlibrary loans more extensible was that we should be able to have a core part of code in COA itself, but keep that as minimal as possible, and have this concept of a back end, which would actually do all the hard work. I mean, there's no way we could possibly hope to predict all the requirements for all the different interlibrary loan providers around the world. So it was clear that we needed to do something that would just do as little as possible, really, and let the back ends actually do the heavy lifting. I suppose the nearest correlation to an existing COA function would be the SMS. So you have the SMS core code, and then that can then talk to all the different SMS providers. So we thought an approach like that would probably work quite well. So we have the core code within COA, which we tend to refer to as the front end, and that it provides the sort of the common functions that you would hope every interlibrary loan provider would require, such as creating a request, deleting a request, that sort of thing. It doesn't actually really do anything by itself. It just provides these core functions. And a back end can add new functions, it can augment existing functions. So if a create workflow has additional steps, the backend can augment that to work with the workflows of the provider. Or a backend can completely define its own workflow. It doesn't have to use any of the predefined work we've done at all. So that enables a backend to define code paths and UI for that particular provider. And the work we've done has provided good examples of that. I mean, the BLDSS backend we've got is quite, I mean, very specific to the BLDSS workflow. They have a number of steps that are very specific to them. So the backend obviously supports those. There's been a lot of work done in Norway. Interlibrary is very big in Norway, and they've done a lot of work on their backend. They've got a very well developed one, and they've defined workflows that are completely the opposite of what we imagined when we first thought, what is interlibrary. So we're quite pleased that it gives you the flexibility to define your own workflow completely. But clearly the interlibrary loan work is only as valuable as the backends. It's pretty worthless without those. So we're very keen for other suppliers or users of other suppliers to look at defining their own backend. So if anyone wants to come and have a chat, and I can explain how they work, and because clearly we want to make it as simple as possible. So yeah, come and have a chat, and we'll see what we can do.
Great, thank you very much. So this first part of this year, we actually did 3 months, a stint of 3 months work on the interlibrary loan module. That's really adding, augmenting on the work that's in the COA 1711 version. So we're obviously very keen to get those into 1811. Some of it is fixes, some of it is more enhancements. One of our team is busy writing documentation to go into the COA manual at the moment, so that should go in. One thing we are considering is moving the backends potentially to plugins to make them sort of pluggable. And as we start getting users using the interlibrary loans modules, we're already getting some great feedback that we're sort of correlating, and hopefully we'll be able to get to at some point. The module itself is reasonably easy to set up. There's only actually 2 system preferences you need to enable. One is to actually enable the module itself so it displays in the staff client, and the other is potentially if you want to have copyright clearance acknowledgement in the message, you can do that as well. There's a single interlibrary loans permission. If the staff member has got that permission, then they can work with interlibrary loan requests. Once the module is enabled, then any end user patron can place a request without having to have any permission at all. There's typically a user category in the system, and that defines partner libraries that you may be working with. So that could be other institutions, other libraries, other bodies that you might be working with. And then within the staff client itself, COA uses patron records in order to define a lending or borrowing partner. So they're set up in the normal way as an end user, as a patron, and they'll have that specific special interlibrary loans category so that COA knows that they are a partner library. You then have the backends. So at the moment, the backends are independent, as Andrew said, from the core code. So we have a Git repository where you can download the backends that we've developed so far. So we've developed one for the British Library Document Supply Service. We've also developed one which is called Freeform, which is a generic email backend. And we've also have in use another backend, which is a COA to COA backend that allows one COA library to request material from another COA library and vice versa. Under the About COA page, there's a nice little section once you enable the module to tell you what you may or may not have forgotten in setting it up. You can see that in the screenshot over on the right-hand side there. So it reminds you that you need to have a back end in place and that you need to have the partner library set up. Then there's a small section, a new small section in the Koa comp file, and that looks something like this. So it defines the backend location of your backends on the server, but it also describes some other interlibrary loans functionality. So, for example, some of the display options. You can have specific interlibrary loan settings per branch, so you can have branch local settings. That might be the how many interlibrary loans a user can place. It might be a numbering prefix, and so on. For the British Library, there's these extra parameters. You can see them at the top there, the API URL, the API application. That defines very specifically the integration with the British Library. So obviously, if you're just doing free-form emails, then you don't need that section. Just a few other things before I hand over to Janet to show you interlibrary loans. A few of the other things that we have done is that if you're using services like Sun and EDS, most of those have some sort of interlibrary loans integration where you can hit a button and request an interlibrary loan. What we've done there is to allow EDS or Sun to construct an open URL which will directly populate Koa's interlibrary loan form. So in effect, you could be looking at an article in EDS, click on the interlibrary loan request, put it into Koa, and then it can go through the mediation process in Koa to request that material. There's a wiki page up there with a list of the interlibrary loans, the current interlibrary loans backend on the community wiki page. We also have this concept of unmediated interlibrary loans. So again, because the British Library is so prevalent in terms of distributing interlibrary loans material in the UK, we have some libraries that work unmediated. So in effect, they never manage the interlibrary loans request process. And what that means is a patron can place a request directly in the OPAC, and then 2 or 3 minutes later receive the article in electronic format as a PDF into their mailbox without any staff interaction. So that's quite interesting. We're also looking at some other interlibrary loan services. So we've got we're looking at redoing the Koa to Koa one. There's also a service called Subito, which some of you may be aware of. We're looking to do integration with. And we've even had one of our libraries add some very nice jQuery, which allows the end user, the patron, when they're submitting the request, to check that perhaps they already have that article in Sun. So rather than pay for the cost of the interlibrary loans, maybe redirect them straight to Sun or EDS to go and get the article first of all. Right, so that's enough background. I'm going to hand over to Janet now, and she's going to just walk you through what we've done today. So I think she's going to walk you through our integration with the British Library, but also our sort of free-form interlibrary loan requests as well. So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I get to do the show and tell using a keyboard, which I'm not familiar with. So that's my caveat up front. I start mistyping, but yeah, I'm going to be using a system that's working with the Arts University Bournemouth, and that's a relatively small arts university down on the south coast of the UK. But I suppose just whilst interlibrary loans is really key for a university, like it's not exclusively so. We've got libraries who are medical libraries and also special libraries, and the National Archives, for example, use our interlibrary loans module. So there's quite a range of different user types who are interested in the system. The system I'm using at Arts University Bournemouth is not live yet. I did a training with them last week for interlibrary loans, and also they're being an arts library really heavy on look and feel, so we've been doing quite a lot on their CSS. So this is their OPAC, but sitting underneath it is genuine Koa, so there's a lot of style going on here. So at the moment, Arts University Bournemouth are like in the position of some libraries, they manage their interlibrary loan queries using email requests from people that come in, or people come in via desk and so on. They put them all on an Excel spreadsheet, and then they have to go out to the British Library, or they have to manage the requests in some way. So having an integrated system, such as I'm going to be showing you, is going to be a real boon for them. We're also using a test API, so some of the responses that they'll see when they actually go live might change a little bit, so we might get some richer results back. But it does mean that we can demonstrate it and place some requests without fear of incurring costs in disponibility. So this is their OPAC, and first of all, I'm going to log in because, of course, obviously, and hopefully some of this will put into context some of the detail that Jonathan's been going through. So when you log into the system, you obviously have to authenticate in order to get your in order to be able to sort of verify that you will be able to use the interlibrary loan model. So in terms of managing a quota, for example, many libraries want to be able to restrict users in some way to a number of concurrent requests and so on. So I'm just logged in with my account right now, and I have a link to my interlibrary loan requests, and through this module I can see any requests that I've currently created over the system. I can view the request. I can also see where the back end, what the origination of the back end is. So I've got an illustration of a BL, a British Library Document Supply Service. That's the BLDSS, so that you're seeing there. And also freeform, so that's one that's been manually entered. I suppose in terms of being able to create requests, traditionally, I was a systems librarian in a university prior to my role at PTFS. And traditionally, we tended to create manual requests via a form that was submitted, but using the API technology directly to the document supply service. It always turns it on its head, because as I see, if I'm going to create a new request using the BLDSS system, first of all, I'm prompted to clarify my copyright clearance. And this goes back to that system preference that Jonathan mentioned. You can define, just using some HTML markup, exactly what your copyright clearance message should be. Basically, agreeing to the terms and conditions. You're not going to photocopy and share with people. You're not going to put it on the web, and so on and so forth. So this is just an example for testing. By clicking yes, you agree to X, Y, Z. So I'm just going to click yes and go through into this BLDSS form. And essentially, what we're doing is querying the British Library stock directly. So I've got a search form. So instead of actually having to manually put in my article details, my information, type them in, I can use the searching service in effect to query what the BL could provide for me. And this is going back to what Stephanie was talking about earlier. I think bridges might be a key for the session, because my example here also goes back to my systems librarian days, when I had a spell of trying to write things for peer-reviewed. That's my maiden name, but it's always a good example to have something you can spell in a tense situation. So essentially, I've put my keyword search in, and it's pulled back my results. I'm querying what the British Library has, and I can see that they've got my article in Library High Tech. They haven't archived it yet. So we can request it basically at this point by clicking on the request number here. The screens are relatively configurable, so you can have more information displaying or less, as the case may be. So I click through into yes, I do. So I click through, and it's telling me that I've placed my request. Here's my article at the bottom as a new request there. But I'm placing that as an end user, maybe as a student or staff. It's just created it as so that library staff can then mediate that request. That is demanding a sort of midway point to be able to verify that we are actually creating that request. The other option, of course, is if you search the BLDSS and it doesn't find material, or your tendency, your preference is to actually physically type in details for an item, you can use the free form, and that's essentially, again, I'm going to clear my copyright by talking on yes, but this essentially lets me type in the details for the request that I want to place. So I can choose the material type. So in this instance, I might be interested in a book loan and a publication title. So we went to Powell's library, Powell's bookshop yesterday, and I went a bit mad, but I just found a few materials, but I just put in one that I got yesterday, Cleopatra by Stacey Sitchin. And so I might put in my details, I'll fill out the detail in full. You've also got the option to put in article, chapter details and part details. So this is optional. I mean, it may be a book loan that I'm actually wanting, but it could be a chapter within a book. So you've got that ability to be able to add in some more refinement there if you're just requesting, say, several pages within a book or indeed a journal article. I also need to select my borrow options in terms of the branch. Now, for Arts University Bournemouth, there is only one branch, there is a single site. It's a nice, straightforward library in terms of sort of co-configuration. But of course, on the server side, you potentially might have different BL accounts for different libraries. If you're a multi-site environment, each site has their own contract with the British Library, for example. So selecting the destination branch has a bearing on what ultimately gets, on which library ultimately gets charged when the requests come in. So I'm just going to choose my arts library here and click on create to create a free form request. So the end result should be I've created a couple of, there's my Cleopatra material. Obviously, the usual sort of stuff, and that applies. So I suppose the other thing, obviously you've got functionality, you can view the status of the request and so on. It's where it is in the life cycle of interlibrary loan requesting. But now we're going to go in and have a look at the staff side. And in the staff side, I'm logged in as a member of staff with those privileges, so I can manage my interlibrary loan details. And in my view requests, I've just clicked on interlibrary loan from the home page. And in the view iLL request page, I can list requests. From here, as a member of staff, I can also create new requests if I want to by BLDSS or freeform. But ultimately, in my list, I've got all the requests that have been created. To filter down, I can filter by status, and status is really important, certainly from the staff side, to be able to manage at a glance what my new requests are, so I can select my new request to see anything that has been created recently, quite a few things of different types. In fact, that's 1 of 30, so I just have a look at all of them. But I suppose status is significant as well, because some of them are driven by the application. So any new request comes in as a new request. When you request it from the British Library, it automatically becomes requested. If you request it from partners, it will automatically gain the status of requested from partners. But in addition to that, you can also utilise authorised value categories. There's an authorised value category called ill status. So you can create your own statuses, and that can be really useful in terms of library management, in terms of their workflow, what they, whether, if it's a book, if they're loaning it out, subsequently loaning it out using colour circulation policies, when it comes back, it needs to go to another library. So libraries can manage those statuses by creating them in the authorised value category list selection. So the items, a couple of titles that I just requested. Yeah, so oh right, okay, yeah. There we go. So here's my my book request by Cleopatra, Stacey Schiff, and if I scroll along, I can manage my request in any way that I choose. I can also, scrolling down, see that when you're, so in fact, if I move over to here and click on Manage Request, I can manage the request via confirming it with the British Library or potentially placing requests with any of my partner libraries. So it's up to the member of library staff how you deal with that. Although I might have created the request using the BL search form, I could actually confirm it with another library. So I could confirm it with a partner library. Now I'm going to pass this through the British Library requesting. If I click on Confirm Request, it acknowledges that it's going to set it to requested, so I have taken action to request it from source. So I can click on Confirm Request. And it's requested my library from one of my sources. Click something bizarre. So I'm going to go back to my list of requests and have a look at another title that I requested here. So this one that's requested by somebody at AUB, this request number on the 6th. I'm going to go in. This was requested from the BLDSS. I click into Manage Request, and it should show me that it was previously placed with the BL, and because that has made a real-time request with the BL, I can check the British Library status, and that's a real-time status with the British Library. It tells me that it's got an estimated dispatch date and whether it's dispatched. So I'm actually going back and looking at the status of that particular request with the BL, and it gives me the total cost. And not too bad. Just trying to find one more request to try and submit. Set one down. It's completed. Yeah. I'll create another one briefly using the BL because I want to actually go through that submission with the British Library. We'll do a Charles Handy. Give you an opportunity to use the keyboard as well. So I'm going to put in my details here. And branch again. And this again, from the staff side, I can still go through and select a material. I'm going to be requesting a book. And so for this one, the 1998 version, and click on Request. I'm not going to select title, chapter, because in effect it might be a So again, I've got my option to confirm the request. And at this point, I can actually choose detail about that request with the British Library. And depending on the material that you're requesting, you are presented with different formats that you might be fulfilling that request. So in this instance, it's a book loan. So I'm actually requesting the loan of a book from the library. But it might be an article. It might be, I might have the option to select different formats formats, whether it's an encrypted article or unencrypted, whether I even want a paper version. In this instance, I'm requesting book loan, so I can say, do I want it to come in 4 days or a really quick one if it's a very difficult member of staff that's coming, and what the quality might be. So I can select my potential requirements and then check the price. And again, that goes back to the British Library, and it will tell me what the price is going to be for that transaction. As I say, this is a test system using test API. So for me, that's an incorrect price because it's in dollars, but of course it looks perfectly fine for you guys. So, and then I can just go ahead if I'm happy with it and place a request. And all being well, that should create my request with the British Library, and I can see that some data comes back from iLL to metadata, and again, I've got this check British Library status option that shows me when it might be dispatched. And the lovely thing about when you're doing articles this way is that actually tells you if you're submitting it via download. Some end users like it to come directly to their email address. You can actually see when they clicked on the material and actually downloaded it, which is really useful in terms of a sort of verification that it was received and so on. So there's some lovely features to it. I think we see it as, in terms of AUB managing their requests with slips of paper and Excel spreadsheets. It's a real benefit. Obviously, there's a lot of other management around this module. It's not a training course that I can spend hours on that. So, just to give you an overview where some of those elements in the PowerPoint fit in terms of what you're actually seeing on the in the client, either on the unpack and the start client. Hopefully, it sort of sets a bit of that in context. I think is that about 22. So.
Time. Questions?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Scott?
So when the patron is placing a request in the OPAC, first of all, I wouldn't have found it because there was no button, but that's just the UI. But it was placed immediately, as far as I can see. How does the user know what the cost for placing the request is? And should there be some kind of confirmation that this will be really expensive and you just lost $34 by clicking on this?
Well, the cost only comes in when the staff mediate requests. So you can prevent a user from placing too many requests. So you can say they're only allowed 5. So in effect, you're sort of almost setting a budget per user. So you can say they can only have 5 requests. It's then up to the staff member to mediate that request and potentially reject it if they think it's too expensive, and reset the status, go back to the user. So there's you don't see the cost in the OPAC.
Oh, so there is no cost for the user.
No.
It's just okay. Is it possible to have something like this? Because sometimes, at least in our libraries, the users have to pay something for an iLL request because it does cost.
Certainly would be in the with the British Library. It certainly would be because their API does return the cost. We just choose not to display it in the OPAC. So potentially it could be done.
I have another question. Actually, I have 4. But please interrupt me if I'm asking too many questions. When doing a pre-form request, can you validate it somehow to say that, well, you need some information and one word in the title is not enough?
Do you mean sort of restrict the amount of information that the user puts in the request?
I mean, to make sure that the user puts enough information so that you don't have to go back and say that, oh yeah, we need a book and nothing else. What are you actually wanting?
Yeah, we do have some libraries that mark certain fields as mandatory, just using jQuery.
another thing. Do you get alerts in the staff UI or by email when someone places a request? Or is it something that you have to check for?
No, you don't, but that's on the to-do list, isn't it? Yeah, that's on the to-do list.
One more question. If you had multiple backends, is that something that the architecture supports so that you have multiple PTFS like backends that the user can select from?
Yeah, you can have as many backends as you want, and one of the new things we've added is you can switch the backend. There's a function to change the backend, so that if you've tried, say, the British Library, and you haven't had success there, or it's too expensive, you can switch the backend to a free form request or another service and request the material from another source.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about the Koha to Koha piece of how they can talk to each other, because I think it's a really important function that's in the system.
Yeah, so the Koha to Koha integration, you saw how we did the search, or you saw how Janet did the search in the British Library. What we've done is with the Koha to Koha installation is you define your target libraries. They're just Z3950 targets in the normal place under administration, and you choose which of those targets you want to query. And in effect, it does an SIU query against those targets, and you'll see the hits come back from the library. Once you've done that, you can place a request against it, and it will pull the request into the start side, as you saw here. Once you mediate the request, at the point that you click confirmation, that confirmation button, what it does is it uses Koha's iLL integration to place a hold request on the remote system, so that when the other library is running their holds to pull list, they'll actually see a reservation pop up in their holds to pull list, and it will alert them to go and pull the book off the shelf and put it in an envelope and post it off, or whatever they're going to do with them. So that's essentially how it works.
Oh, we're going to move on to our next presentation, but we'll welcome questions at the break.
Yeah, very happy to speak to anybody afterwards. Thank you very much for your time.